No one has dominated rhythm game music in such a short time, quite like Frums has. Known for their extremely unique music style and visuals, Frums went from a completely unknown artist to one of the most recognizable names associated with rhythm games just a few years after their debut in the BMS world, and has since been exploded in popularity, with their works being licensed for some of the biggest rhythm games of today. With everything Frums has accomplished so far, you have to have wondered, what is the history behind their music? To answer this, once again, we'll have to go back to the beginning. Like many rhythm game artists, Frums somehow came across and started playing rhythm games when they were younger. In fact, the first rhythm game they ever played was DDR Ultra Mix 2 for the original Xbox, when they were only 6 or 7 years old. Not only that, but it was also the first console game they ever played. So naturally, Frums became hooked onto rhythm games. But, more importantly, they also became hooked on the songs that were featured. And from there, they began to build up a desire to someday have their own songs featured in rhythm games. Frums was too young for that, however, and instead, they continued to fall down the rhythm game rabbit hole on their own. For example, in November of 2006, when Frums was nearly 8 years old, they had signed up to the Flash-based 4-key rhythm game Flash Flash Revolution under the alias Cert, and from here, Cert went on to discover Step Mania, where they had a much wider choice of songs to try out, and they became exposed to even more rhythm game music. The tipping point for Cert to start producing was when they found a certain Step Mania sim file called Fidelity Crisis by Blitzluna. After they played the sim file, because of how much they enjoyed it, they looked up the song to come across the track visualization video for it. Whilst watching this, Cert took notice of the fact that there were only 4 sound channels, yet the song still sounded amazing. That tiny bit of simplicity gave them the motivation they needed to download Family Tracker a few weeks later and create their first song ever, a fully chiptune track simply called B. For the first song Cert made, this is extremely impressive. In particular, the thing most impressive about this is the ability for Cert to compose something at this speed, and with so much rhythmic variety this early. There's plenty of slight timing changes throughout the song, and the chiptune drum set is put together surprisingly well. As a matter of fact, Frums had stated when they were younger, they were originally a drummer, so being able to keep up with ridiculous rhythms like this, and at this speed, makes a lot of sense, especially when combined with their previous experience in rhythm games. As they worked more on their earlier songs, one day, they noticed they accidentally misspelled the drums group track as Frums instead, and while at first they thought this sounded like a decent album name, eventually they decided it sounded even better as an artist's name, and so Frums was born, with Cert creating a brand new SoundCloud account later, called Frums, and in the summer of 2013, they released their first known song onto the platform, a minimal track called This Poor Diplo Creates Samek. Albeit a pretty basic track, you can hear the chiptune influence once again, and judging from this and the previous song, it seemed that Frums already had a knack for creating strong melodies and progressions. The chiptune ambience also creates an atmosphere that immediately draws you in, and this is a technique that Frums would come to use a lot in their later works, to give their songs a more distinctive and unique feel, just that instead of chiptune, the sound would be completely different. This wasn't enough to fully judge the potential Frums had though, that is until several months later, when Frums completely shattered all current expectations of them, with the release of Goatee on the 3rd of January 2014. This is quite the jump from This Poor Diplo in almost every regard. Perhaps one of the most chaotic IDM tracks I've ever heard, featuring a lot of distortion and breakbeats. The drum set used was uniquely crafted to give a soft and satisfying sound, but is used in a ridiculous fashion to create some of the most absurd time signatures you can find. Listening to this genuinely feels like the time signature changes every second, and that's actually a pretty common thing you come to find about Frums' music style. If you thought Leaf was chaotic with her music, you're in for a treat. And to end the song off, we have this terrifying section. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here either, but this section did make me notice the description. 5 simple words: complacency, shock, fear, thought, and madness, or in other words, the 5 stages that this song seems to go through. Clearly, Frums knew exactly what they were doing, and to top it off, it's likely Frums made this in an attempt to make a chartable song for rhythm games, which Frums would end up taking advantage of in November. Remember how I said Frums had signed up to Flash Flash Revolution? See, in case you don't know, in order to chart songs in Flash Flash Revolution, you have to obtain explicit permission from the artist in question, and provide this proof in a forum thread called the Artist Blanket Permissions. And on the 16th November 2014, Frums provided blanket permission for all of their songs, even being willing to provide assistance with any technical details needed to create a chart. This was an insanely good move by Frums. It saved the effort of having to self-promote by allowing their songs in charts, and thereby allowing it to circulate around the rhythm game community, without having to wait for someone to come to them to ask for permission. And it worked. According to Frums themselves, not 1, not 2, but 3 songs promptly got stepped. It's unsure which ones these are and whether they would ever end up seeing the light of day. However, a bit later in August of 2015, we know for certain that a chart request for Goatee was made, not the normal Goatee however. Frums released an extended version of this and revealed that the song was actually made by genre roulette. Each of those words you saw before was actually a different musical genre, and now instead of 5, it was upped to 11. This would end up finally being charted by the one and the only Gold Stinger later on, and well, needless to say, it was pretty difficult. But I digress, because soon after this, Frums would make their grand entrance to the main stage of rhythm game music. Their debut to BMS has finally come. On August 7, 2015, just 5 days after the Goatee EX post, Frums posted a tweet that had a picture teasing a collection of mysterious files. The credits, background, chord, drums, noise, sweep, and vox files. Whatever could this be for? In September of that same year, this question would be answered, for the Great Blood Battle of 2015 would begin accepting submissions then. Team registrations for this event began in May of 2015, and Frums registered with 3 others, Sayumeki, who would also be producing music, Spirit Snare, and Kanako Kiru, who would both help with visuals. And this alliance would form Team Smith Aile. Now with a total of 441 songs being registered in the competition, this would be the fiercest year it's ever been in the BMS of Fighters. In all honesty, they really couldn't have picked a worse year to participate in for the first time, since usually if you're a newer, no-name artist, it'd be incredibly difficult to get reception even if your work is decent. The only sure way to get out of that stigma is to break the mold and produce something exceptional, something that was unique and hadn't been heard before. Frums did exactly that, starting with Wavetapper. Wavetapper is definitely one of the most interesting and visually appealing BMS that I've ever seen. The background art was made by Frums themselves, which is actually something you'll be seeing a lot of, and the concept here is simple but creative. The song starts with a pretty simple kick-snare pattern, and as the pattern repeats a few times, you'll notice that each sound being made is lit up in a different way on this cube. Once the repeating chord comes in and lights up the orange cube, it immediately becomes clear what's going on. Not only is each sprite a different sound, but each cube is actually a different track, and over time, the song gradually builds up, introducing one sound at a time, one sample at a time, until it's finally complete. The way the song progresses from a single track to this is like a journey, and honestly, I'm inclined to call this one of the most creative songs Frums has ever produced. Not to mention, according to Frums, the samples used in all this comes from various clips of the NPR radio network to add a theme of radio and telephone. And again, considering Frums made the visuals, the work put into this must have been ridiculous. Yet it doesn't end there. While listening to this, the astute among you may have noticed that the grey cube at the bottom right doesn't seem to match to any sound. At first this seems kind of fishy. Maybe it was an accident, a sound that was there before but got removed at the last minute. Well, one thing you have to know about Frums' work is that nothing is there for no reason. In reality, the sprites being flashed are actually symbols in a custom version of katakana, a component of Japanese writing, and when put together, they reveal hidden messages about the nature of the song. All the messages are as follows. The attention to detail by Frums in this case was on a level that was rarely seen, and this would carry on to what's considered to be the breakthrough song of Frums. I believe this needs no introduction. This is yet another song that has outstanding visuals and matches every single layer of the song with a single element within the background art. The song and background were made to, quote, be based on the nostalgic eye catchers from around 2000, having a VHS-like aesthetic and atmosphere. The song really starts to pick up traction when the voice sample is introduced. Funding for this program was made possible by viewers like you. This sample is chopped up and spliced up in various ways to create what's essentially a breakbeat using the voice, and this is also shown in the visuals. It gets even more intense with the next sentence, Broadcast Corporation, and the chopping here is on a completely different level. I never even recognized what was being said until I saw the lyrics for the first time. Again, this is unlike anything we've seen before in BMS, and both of these would end up doing extremely well, with credit to being the 8th song of the team by a large margin, and sitting today at 1 million views on YouTube. The team still only came 25th out of 160, but this is amazing for being Frums' first ever performance in the BMS of Fighters, and their debut couldn't have been any more grand. From here, Frums began to surge in popularity, going from only a few hundred listens per month to thousands on SoundCloud. It seemed like Frums' dreams were starting to come true, but this was still just the beginning. Before the end of the BMS of Fighters, Frums posted a teaser of a sample they were going to use in the new release. This was only part of a recording of a weather service forecast for eastern Massachusetts.
37, wind west at 68, gusting to 76 miles
It turns out this would be used for Frums' song that would be included as part of the groundbreaking 2015 album. For those that don't know, Groundbreaking is a yearly compilation album of some of the most popular songs from the BMS fighters of that year, with the songs usually being remastered, extended in some way, or completely remixed. For the album, Frums extended credits, almost tripling its length from the original contest, and part of how they did this was by using these additional samples. And of course, there were completely new sections that added a brand new flavor to the song. A really nice thing that Frums noted about this was the deliberate choosing of the original sample. In a series of tweets, Frums expresses their gratitude for their recent success, explaining how they've been composing for years without an audience, with no one but their friends and family listening to their creations. Credits and Wavetapper changed everything, and the feeling of achievement and motivation they got from it was made possible by viewers like you. After this, Frums also began getting requests for more collaborations and appearances on labels. In particular, Frums made an appearance on the well-renowned Diverse System label, almost ironically having a hand on the Beatless Challenge, a compositional challenge for a selected number of artists where you must create a song without the use of a drum beat. Deletion Lake was created in response to this. Additionally, Frums also participated in the Undertale project, a project where Dojin artists showed off their skills in making rearrangements of pieces from Undertale. And here, Frums rearranged one of my personal favorites from Undertale. Here we are, spinning this menacingly slow track into a very intense Gabba remix. Even though Frums hadn't been producing for that long, they were clearly very versatile and capable of switching genres entirely, whilst not completely losing their unique style that connects listeners in the first place. Between this, Frums somehow managed to balance the production of these tracks and the production of their very first album that they would later release on the New Year's of that year. This was called Meta Continues, and it contained 6 highly anticipated new songs of varying lengths and intensities. Each song in this album is an art piece in its own right. For instance, Gone in the Morning is an incredibly chill, minimal piece, focusing a lot more on atmosphere. Similar to Disport Deplore, and Infinity is a track that you can feel desperation clinging onto with that melody. However, all of these seem to be the build-up towards definitely the biggest highlight of the album, something that many consider to be one of Frums' best songs, including myself. XNO, a 9-minute progressive track that has so many different styles intertwined between each other that each part sounds like a completely different song, and I am not kidding when I say that. This reminds me of Goatee, except this time, the transitions between genres feels more seamless and much more distinguishable, not to mention the sudden introduction of a math rock, almost jazzy section, something that we had yet to see from Frums, and something that we'll see more of later. The album as a whole is, in my opinion, a masterpiece that contains some of Frums' best work, but man is it underrated. Within the next year, Frums continued to work on independent tracks, releasing Memory Factory.lzh, B-Bit Futures of participating in the sequel to Undertale, and continuing to collaborate with Diverse System. By now, Frums' name was starting to become bigger in the scene, but to continue, what Frums needed was another work to really solidify their presence. And what better way to achieve this than participating in another BMS of fighters? For the Legenda Esta Myth, Frums signed up on the team with 3 other people, Nitro for music, and Teleperion and B_K for help with charting the BMS score. Now, Frums took a break from the 2016 BOF, so this was a highly anticipated event for them since it would be their first major contest since their 2015 breakthrough. So the question was, would they, along with Nitro, be able to deliver to the expectations? Considering how experimental Frums usually is, this could have been tricky, but this year, Frums yet again went above and beyond with the 2 songs that they produced. Let's start with They Are Many Colors. Warning though, there's a lot of flashing. This is definitely one of the more interesting background arts, again made by Frums themselves. It features a pixel man trapped inside a box, and the background changes colors in accordance with the mood of the song, from black to red to green to blue, back to black again. Okay, so there aren't that many colors, but it's clearly a reference to the RGB model, which you can produce any color with. Frums' note on the song heavily implies that the character in the box is going through hallucinations of some kind. It's unknown why this is, but if this is the case, then the colors clearly not only indicate the song's mood, but the character's mental state. Even though the colors are connected to the character in this way, they do seem to have a mind of their own, as implied by that creepy looking eye and the title, specifically the choice in wording. When I first saw the title, I always assumed it was just a mistranslation, since most rhythm game artists are Japanese, but Frums is American, and is in fact able to speak in both English and Japanese, so considering the attention to detail Frums usually has, using they instead of there are many colors could not have been an accident. Also, fun fact, the background in this part is actually a snippet of the first ever published issue of the New York Daily Times on September the 18th, 1851. But I don't see the significance this could have in regards to the overall story. And of course, the song itself is just as trippy and bizarre as the background art, but it's a damn good listen, maintaining Frums' incredible progressive style from previous songs. The green part with the spliced up air horn is probably my favorite part. Masterful production right there. After this was the even more cryptic song produced alongside, Options. The music is very similar in style to Credits, boasting a similar rhythm and having parts that focus on vocal chopping. In fact, when it comes to the music, there isn't a whole lot to be said that hasn't been touched on already. What's interesting is, again, the background art. There's a whole lot going on here, but pay attention to what it looks like incomprehensible runes. In reality, this is fully translatable. Again, someone beat me to the punch in the comments, but it all just translates to what's being said by the voice in the song, and after the code was cracked, Frums posted the key for it on their Twitter. Like I said, the dialogue is incredibly cryptic, but the voice does talk about some information search facility, not to mention it's talking about devices being connected and a world-beaten architecture. So I assume this is about us being taken on a tour around this facility, with the voice being our tour guide. The "we'll see you again soon" message right at the end makes me even more inclined to believe that. Ironically, even though all of this is incredibly vague, it ends with this line.
Information alone is not enough. We also need the meaning of that information.
As they did before, not only is this music in a very unique style, Frums went above and beyond with adding detail to the visuals. To be honest, I don't think there's many background art in BMS that can compete. Not to mention the team's third song by Nitro is just as good as both of these, and very heavily inspired by Frums' style. But the results they ended up getting for all three of these is actually pretty shocking to say the least. By the end of the event, Options placed at 40th, There Are Many Colors placed at 44th, and Polylattice placed at 117th. Granted, considering there were 483 songs total this time around, that's still a really good performance, but these placements do not reflect the quality of the work that's been shown. Based on what I've seen from this year, I would have at least expected There Are Many Colors to get top 20, but again, this wasn't bad, and the Semicolon team inched their way up to 14th place overall, out of 145. Frums' name was starting to become huge now in the scene, and the next several months was the period of time they would keep the momentum going as much as they could. In December of 2017, they released We Want to Run, which in all honesty is probably the most normal Frums song I've heard. In 2018, we also had Great Fury of Heaven, Fake, End of System, and perhaps the song that caught me the most off guard, released on the 15th of July 2018, Turnstile Jumper. That's right, Frums is even capable of producing jazz, and pretty incredible jazz at that. There's such a wide assortment of instruments in this used and put together so well that it generally makes you wonder if Frums is a human. The drums are understandable since Frums is a drummer at heart, but it's ridiculous how they can get every instrument to synergize so well and flow smoothly. This song was actually a commission for and released for Citus 2, reigning as the fastest song in the game at 321 BPM, though the actual scanline movement speed is halved, clocked at 160.5 BPM. You could make the whole argument about 160.5 being its true BPM, of course, just like I had before, but if anything, it's more based on perspective and the pace of the song, and I'd say it feels pretty damn fast. A month after this, Frums released Drop Dead, a song well known for being one of the most incomprehensible tracks we've yet to see from them. This was made for the rhythm game called Archaea, and considering it's chocked full of BPM and timing changes, it's pretty clear what Frums' goal was here, to create something extremely challenging for the game, and oh boy, did they succeed. In fact, I believe Drop Dead is one of the most notoriously difficult 9 charts in the game because of the constant speed changes. Not to mention, the song is pretty unique in that it's the only song in the game where its present difficulty is higher than its future difficulty. Regardless, this was the period of time Frums really started popping off since they began actively featuring in rhythm games. They had finally managed to accomplish the dream they set out for themselves originally, and on top of that, gained a steady following of listeners. To keep the momentum going, when the time came, Frums would return one last time, as of the time of recording, to the BMS of Fighters, or in this case, the Go Back to Your Roots 2018. You guys know the drill by now, so I'm just gonna cut to the chase. Frums signed up with only 2 other people on the team, each of these powerhouses being responsible for their own music as well as background art, and these people were Iris France and the one and only Silent Room. This was Team Several Film Studio. In the comments for the team, each member gave their own short note of their motivations in joining, and Frums highlights wanting to sharpen their video and music production skills, as well as to protect poor Nico's smile. And so they got to work. First, Iris, or Eston in this case, produced Upshift, a very intense dubstep track that has one of the cleanest and most colourful background arts I've ever seen. Then we had Silent Room's No Control, a club song that focuses on the synchronization of the motion of the song. And finally, we had Pictured as Perfect, Just when I thought Frums couldn't get any more experimental with their bizarre time signatures and unorthodox beats/note placements, this comes to take the cake for one of the most chaotic things I've ever listened to. I've listened to this many different times in the past, and I'm still barely able to predict what will happen next, especially in this part. Just wow, the background art seems to be pretty normal as well, until this right here shows up. At first this seems like it'll be a one-off thing, until and suddenly, the song completely shifts gears to a more intense and climactic style, whilst the background art shows a bunch of distorted images of people with a single dialogue box that has those sprites that are in the same style as what we saw before. We know what Frums is capable of by now, so this definitely has to mean something. Exactly 1 week after this was uploaded, Frums made a post on Twitter displaying a bunch of cryptic sprites from Picture Was Perfect. Turns out it was none other than the codes to deciphering those messages, with each column in the message corresponding to a letter in the alphabet, indicated by this. Once you go through and painstakingly translate everything letter by letter, you get a series of cryptic messages that form the first-person story of a mysterious individual, as implied by the name of the voice samples playing just before the huge drop, called prisonervox_0012 and 3.wav. Well, you get the picture. And this person, if it's even human, is being changed in very disturbing ways to become the shape they want me to be. Even this person has no idea who they used to be, and they can only guess what they're being turned to. The full story is in the comments of the video, but to end off, they state, "They pulled me into their vortex, and I saw my future reflected in their eyes. A shimmering halo of impossible dreams, void of myself. It was perfect." With all three of these songs performing extremely well, Saber Film Studio ended at 3rd place by a pretty comfortable lead, and by this point, Frums was officially a very well established artist, and they would continue to make their name known in various rhythm games, most notable of which being OS, in which they became a featured artist, and A Dance of Fire and Ice, where their songs are part of the official levels. Frums would also later release a compilation of 20 songs called Vignette on July the 3rd, 2020, which is a collection of a bunch of songs they had already previously made on their SoundCloud. In short, although Frums is definitely one of the newer artists in the scene compared to some we've seen, the presence they've left with their music has been felt, with their unique style being innovations in the world of experimental music, and without a doubt, they have risen to be one of the greats in rhythm game music. Last but not least, here's what they say in regards to their motivation for the future. "Just like every other artist, their particular combination of influences, tastes, etc. leaves me with a certain class of songs, etc. that they can make more readily than other people, a space that's easier for them to explore and experiment in. Right now, they're focused on lighting that space as much as possible, wringing out as much of that coincidental creative cloth as they can, before they die, or otherwise, become unable to keep making music." Before the video ends, I just wanted to give a quick special thanks to Aristocrates for steering me in the right direction whilst I was making this. He told me about the Citus Discord Q&A, which contains a lot of the content from Frums' early years, and although I spent a lot of time researching, it's pretty likely I would have missed this. So, thank you bro, you really helped. He also recently started making some sick bass covers, and soon he's planning on doing some rhythm game covers, so if that interests you, be sure to check him out. Also, thanks to Frums for giving some insight on when they started making music, and the motivations behind the things they'll be producing next. I appreciate your help. Speaking of which, please be sure to support their music. Links to their platforms are in the description. As usual, if you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe, we're getting super close to 1,000 subs, yo, and comment on who you want to see next. And I'll catch you in a bit.